Good evening and welcome to Magic the Judging. My name is David Lyfrod-Smith, and it is my pleasure and honour to be taking over this stream from Paul Smith. Paul built this from the ground up, and I am a huge debt for having such a great idea and then having the tremendous will to pull it through and to make it into something that actually happened. He's already much missed in the UK judge community, and I think will be missed in the judge community worldwide. We all wish Paul is doing very well with his family and his other hobbies, and we hope that we might manage to entice him back for an occasional thing here and there as well. So I'm going to start today's stream with a little bit of an introduction to myself, where I come from, what I do, and then also going on to our main topic, which is talking about Return to Ravnica. Of course, it's currently Friday night. We have pre-releases tomorrow. I have a pre-release starting in just about exactly 5 hours at midnight, and we're going to talk about a little bit of introduction to how to make your pre-releases fun, how to make your judging experiences with the set go well, and a few rules and other interactions that are likely to come up as you start to judge to cover the latest set. So let's start by talking about me. My name is David Lyfrod-Smith. I am a level 3 judge from Reading, which is a small town in the United Kingdom. I've been a judge for about 5 years now. I certified somewhere around Lorwyn at Grand Prix Krakow 2007. And I have been a level 3 judge for just over 2 years, since Pro Tour Amsterdam. My role in the UK community is directly to be in charge of level 1s who are looking to go up to level 2. So that's my key focus within my UK community. But you might also have seen some other things that I've been involved in, such as the Gathered Excel resource, the Lapsing Triggers resource as it was, and General Oracle resource as it continues to be. Of course, we don't have Lapsing Triggers anymore. So we are now in a position of that resource is continuing. I was also involved in the new triggered abilities policy, and we do have a variety of other. I have a lot of other projects as well. As for myself as a Magic player, I've been playing Magic. I think it's about 11 years now, since somewhere between Prophecy and Invasion. So I've been involved in the game for a very long time. I just had my very first question from Mr. Tom Sukaitis. Thank you very much, Tom. He's asked just a simple question on how long we're planning to stream. The aim is to be about 30 to 40 minutes tonight. It's just a first session, just so I can get used to the mechanics of it, and we can get introduced to one another. So that's me. That's where I come from, and that's what I've been up to. I also wanted to talk a little bit then about Return to Ravnica. I mentioned that, for example, I've got a midnight pre-release coming up, midnight 01. My local game store is a little place in Reading called Eclectic Games. If you are a member of the UK judge community, you are probably quite familiar with it. We had a judge conference there just last weekend, so I've certainly been seeing a lot of the place. It's a great little store. We've got room for about 50-odd people. We're running a total of 5 pre-releases over the weekend, which includes a midnight one tonight, Friday night, one on Saturday morning, one on Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. I'm going to be running all of the evening ones, so that's tonight's midnight one as well as tomorrow's afternoons and Sunday afternoon. And I'm playing in all 5, rotating through all the guilds. So I'm going to start with a talk about my views on how to run pre-releases in general and the Return to Ravnica pre-release specifically. Talk about different ideas for how you can make that fun and enjoyable for your players, and then move on to a discussion of judging with the set in general, as of course it does become legal in competitive formats not that long afterwards. So let's start by talking about the pre-releases. Return to Ravnica, as I'm sure everybody watching the stream knows, has a particular type of pre-release which is new to sort of a kind of a new gimmick, as well as the standard sealed setup we're going to have one booster. Everybody gets one booster, which is specific to a guild of their choice. The cards in this, we don't know the exact breakdown, but effectively what we're expecting to see is that it will contain only cards which are playable within the guild that they have selected. So, for example, if you choose Izzet, the blue-red guild, you will only have things which are blue, red, or both, artifacts, and you will not see, as far as we are aware, things like, for example, Tower Drake, which is a blue creature with a white ability, which belongs to the Azorius Guild, has an Azorius watermark on it, and would, as far as we are aware, not be an Izzet booster. A couple other things about those guild boosters. Firstly, those boosters can only contain one mythic. If they contain a mythic at all, it will be the mythic guild leader. So continuing with the Izzet example, if you do open a mythic, it will be Niv Mizzet Draco Genius. The most important thing to remember here is that people who are, for example, worrying about the financial differences, i.e. should they pick a blue guild because they want to open Jace, or should they pick Golgari because they want to open Vraska, they can't actually open those Planeswalkers in their guild booster, although of course they could open them in their 5 regular Return to Ravnica boosters. So that's, I think, an important first thing to be aware of in case people are worrying about that. The other thing about these boosters, which I think is very new, very specific, and very, very interesting, is the ability. These boosters always contain the pre-release card for your guild. So we have multiple different pre-release cards. Depending on which guild you pick, you get a different one, which if you play Mirrored and Besieged, similar kind of concept with multiple pre-release cards. There are 5 different ones, therefore, one for each of the 5 guilds. The real difference that we're seeing here is that for the first time, you're actually going to be allowed to play pre-release cards. I don't know about you guys, but I have spent probably a minute or so per pre-release weekend for a very large number of years, drumming into my players' heads, you can't play your pre-release card, you can't put it in your deck, you can't use it. So rather than just letting that stand as an assumption, something else I would say to you is think about talking to your players about that. Tell them, isn't this exciting? You can use your pre-release card. You don't have to just put it in your binder and forget about it. You can put it in your deck. And the selection of pre-release cards is such that pretty much everybody is going to want to play the pre-release card to get, because they're pretty good. Just continuing to talk about how this guild thing is going to affect us, I think it's also important to say, so for example, if you pick Azorius, the blue-white guild, you are not in any way required to play blue-white, or in fact blue or white. You could not play those colours whatsoever. The intention is just that this gives you a added bit of support to make it possible to play the guild that you chose, but not that you're forced to. But it will be easier because you'll have a whole booster of cards which will only be along those colour lines. But if you don't want to do it, if your black and green cards, for example, if your black, red and green cards are more exciting, you want to play Rakdos and Golgari, fine, no problem. So let's talk a little bit about pre-releases specifically as a type of tournament. Pre-releases, I think, almost occupy, in my head, a real different bit of brain space to other tournaments. Even more so than Friday Night Magic, even more so than other regular REL tournaments. A pre-release is all about the fun. It's all about a casual introduction to a set. It's all about experiencing the new cards and having a good time without having to worry about anything else. And that's very much what we want these experiences to be for your players. So something that I really want to talk about is how to maximize your players' fun and how to make the event fun. The number one tip for this is, in order to make your event fun, make your event fun. Make the event fun for you. Make sure you're having a fun time. Make sure that you are visibly having a fun time. As judges, particularly judges when we're working in a store or another play location where we judge frequently, you are likely to be a community figure. You're going to be somebody that everybody, maybe not everybody knows, but everybody at least recognizes. And of course, even for brand new players on the day, you are going to be one of the first faces they see. You're going to be welcoming them to the tournament, and you are the person that everyone is going to interact with at that tournament. They're going to be listening to your announcements, watching your body language as you talk about things. So if you're having fun, if you're excited about it, and if you're not excited about it, then maybe Magic's not the right game for you because it's Ravnica, so you should be having a good time. I know I'm having a good time. But, show that excitement, show that enjoyment, and it's infectious. People will pick up on it. I would always recommend with any kind of tournament that you have a little brief opening address. Particularly at a pre-release, what I would focus on there is the key rules elements, that questions that you can answer at the start of the day to save yourself time later. And I think that's important to have that functional side, but also think about how you can build up that kind of community feeling and that good feeling right from the start. Because, uh, in fact, I've got a real suggestion for this. Your players are divided into 5 groups automatically because people will have signed up for Golgari, Izet, and so on. They will have already signed themselves to guilds. So what I'm planning on doing, and what I think is a great idea, is overlap the mechanical problem that you have of handing out different products to different players with the kind of community spirit fun side of it. Seat all the players from the same guild together for deck building. Say, these are my Golgari tables, these are my Izet tables, these are my Rakdos tables, and so on. And get everybody in one place. Then when you start your introduction, you've got a built-in mechanism to leverage a little bit of team feeling. You can say, over in this corner, I've got my Golgari Swarm players. Let's hear it from the Golgari Swarm players. Get them to cheer. Get them to enjoy it. Then talk about the Golgari mechanic, which is Scavenge, which we'll be talking about soon. Give a little bit of introduction there. Move on to the Izet Guild. Say, over here we've got my Izet League players. Use the guild's full names. Make it something to talk about. Make it something exciting, and get your players to remember who else is on their guild, and also to spy out who's on the other guilds, because there's no official support for it, but there is a little bit of a guild competition thing going on. Part of what the players are going to get in their guild packs, which have their specific boosters, includes a guild-specific achievement card. So they're all going to be working towards similar goals, similar ends. So again, use that. Talk about some of the things that they're going to be doing. Talk about the different feel of the guilds. There's some natural kind of tension between all those different kind of guilds, and let's not forget that people are going to pick guilds not just that they think have the best cards or the most expensive cards, but that they identify with on a personal level. I myself, if you were to go to the Planeswalker Points website, you would see that I have signed up as Orzhov. I like Orzhov, I like what they're doing, and I identify with that kind of black-white feel. Orzhov aren't in it till Gatecrash, so I'm going to have to wait, but that's fine because I've got some close seconds. Actually, my second favourite is Boros, which is also in Gatecrash, so that'll be a great pre-release. But in the meantime, I'm really looking forward to rocking out Azorius and Rakdos. Those are the 2 guilds which really appeal to me out of this. I enjoy the really conflicting sides of those 2 guilds, and so as I'm running each of these pre-releases, I'm going to be playing up my role for the guild that I'm in for that pre-release. So, for example, for tonight, I am part of the Golgari Swarm, the Green-Black Guild. So I'm planning to introduce it in a very sort of Golgari zombie way, in a kind of identify with it, play around a little, joke, talk about the fact that, I'm Golgari and I like Golgari players and I don't like not Golgari players. And obviously, I'm well enough known and with my local crowd that they know I'm not actually talking about being biased and I'm just having a laugh, and they'll appreciate that. So use that. You've got this wonderful, thought out, original structure that Wizards have given us for this pre-release with the guilds. Use that to make it fun. Use that to pump it up. If you happen to come across, for example, any great, exciting, guildy sort of plays that players talk to you about during the day, maybe before the next round, announce it. Say, hey, did you hear this guy scavenged 3 different creatures onto one guy and got a 15-power monster? That's awesome. Tell people about it. Give him a round of applause. This is what the pre-release is about. Now, let's talk a little bit about the tournament organisation side of things. Prizes are a really important weapon in the hands of a tournament organizer to set the funometer on a tournament. It's pretty easy. Let's say, for example, you put it up as everybody gets the exact same prize, literally exactly the same, regardless of how well you do. I don't recommend you do this, by the way, but in that world, competition is meaningless. Winning or losing is meaningless. Therefore, there will be a very low competitiveness. Actually, there'll probably be low enough competitiveness that it's not really a tournament anymore, and your players will probably complain. But a flat structure encourages casual play. The other extreme is the guy in first gets everything, no one else gets anything. That engenders a really competitive format, and that's even more top stacked than a Pro Tour qualifier is. A Pro Tour qualifier has a substantially better prize for first place than for everyone else, but it still has some prizes for everyone else. So by using that tool, you can change the behavior of your players. Even if you have a competitive crowd or a casual crowd, they will respond to that financial incentive. So use it. At a pre-release, I strongly urge you to have a very flat prize distribution. For example, if you've got 2 boosters per player, which is a fairly typical prize pool that we've had at our pre-releases, we do a minimum of 1 booster per player, and then the extra 1 booster per player we have as a nice flat prize support. We also try and keep tiebreakers out of it, particularly at casual events where they're poorly understood. Just say, if you get this many points, you get this many prizes. Everybody's the same. So I just had one of my commenters on the stream here say, we do, each player gets 1 booster, top half get 2, top quarter get 3, etc. That's another great little way of, like, a rewarding success, encouraging people to win, but also making sure that you're not rewarding it to the degree where people will want to start becoming competitive. Remember, this is a pre-release. You're not going to have deck registration sheets. You're not going to be doing deck checks. It's going to have very little of the trappings of a competitive tournament, and it shouldn't. This is, for many, many, many players, this is their first introduction to organized play. You want as little of that kind of feel-bad make work as possible. If you absolutely require for your local players, and some areas, oh, I'm sorry, how are you doing, Paul? Sorry, Paul Crosby's just made sure he's known who it is in the chat there. So if you're in one of these situations where you've got different prizes to give out to different players, use it to make things fun. That's really the point. Excuse me. Yeah, so that's the little kind of introduction to competitiveness and about how to make things flat versus not flat. I'm talking here, of course, in the idea that you as the judge have some influence of that. It's very likely in many areas that you're going to be working with a tournament organizer who controls things like prize entry cost, prize structure, so on. Talk to them about it. Make these points to them. As a judge, you're there to, at least in part, form a bridge between the tournament organizer, whose motives may be more financial, and your players, whose motives are likely to be more based on them getting boosters and them having fun. You do need to respect both of those things, but see how you can, come to a conversation, talk to people on both sides, and come to it. So I think we're going on for the 20-minute mark, so I think it's probably time now to talk a little bit about some specific Ravnica judging issues. So what I'm going to start with is just what I plan on telling players tonight about the 5 guild keyword mechanics. As a rule, every pre-release that you judge, you should be talking about the new keywords, partly because they are the focuses of the interest, and partly because they are new, they are unusual. Even the ones which don't actually have any new rules in them, and there are always, sort of ability words or similar that don't, for example, landfall. Landfall has 0 new rules content, it's just a label put onto something that shows up a lot. But because it's showing up a lot, people will see it a lot more and will start to form presumptions and misconceptions about it. So you should talk about it and get them to think about that. So let's go through it. So first guild off the bat we're going to do is white-blue Azorius. The Azorius have what's called a keyword action called detain. Keyword action, I'll just have a little rules aside here. So a keyword action is a verb that has been given a specific magic meaning that's separate from its usual English meaning. These are defined. So the more common ones would be things like draw and sacrifice. Sacrifice we use all the time in Magic, but it does have a very specific rules meaning. It's talking about putting something into the graveyard. It has to be something I control, etc., etc. You will also see things which come and go as mechanics, things like scry. Scry is also a keyword action, and it involves scry number, which means to rearrange the top number cards in my library between the top and bottom in any way I choose. So detain is also a keyword action. What detain means is to detain a permanent, and it has to be a permanent, means that permanent cannot attack, block, or activate its abilities until your next turn, i.e. the person who's detaining's next turn. Most of the cards in the set can only detain creatures. So what effectively you're looking at there is that you choose a creature, and most of the detained sources, I should add, are also sorcery speed, or indeed are sorceries. When you detain that creature, it can't attack or block during your turn, the entirety of your opponent's turn, and then as of the start of your next turn, the creature comes back online and is able to act again. The important thing I would stress to your players here is what detain means. Attacking and blocking is simple. Pacifism is a basic effect. Everybody knows that one. What I would choose to talk about in a little bit more depth is something to talk about is the activated abilities part of it. First of all, what is an activated ability? An activated ability I would usually explain as saying it's anything where you can pay a cost to get an effect. For example, you can tap something for some damage, or you can pay a mana cost to make the creature larger. These are the kinds of things. The usual spot is that they will always be phrased as cost colon effect. What that means is that they're fairly easy to spot. There is one little wrinkle, and I probably wouldn't mention this in my speech because it's unlikely to come up, because, as I said, most things only detain creatures, and there aren't very many planeswalkers. Planeswalkers do have activated abilities, all their planeswalker abilities are activated abilities, but they don't have a colon because they hide it with this strange frame treatment with a little arrow that indicates whether the loyalty is going up and down. I'm enjoying talking about planeswalkers when I have my Lego Lady Chandra back here. Planeswalkers can also be detained, and it will stop them from using their abilities. The attacking or blocking thing is obviously not relevant, but I wouldn't mention that in a speech because it's very unlikely to come up. If it does come up, answer it at the table. So that's all I would tell pre-release players about detain. At more competitive levels, I don't think that there are very many competitively priced detain cards, but there are a couple that you might see. So at a higher level, the most likely issue that's going to come up in terms of competitive playing of detain is that it is a trigger, or well, it's an ability that has no visual effect on the detainee, but which obviously does affect it. So the most likely thing you're going to see is the player whose permanent has been detained trying to attack with it or activate its abilities because they've forgotten. This is one of those things which is very simply an example of a game rule violation, in the same way that it would be if they tried to attack with a creature that has defender, because it can't attack. Can't attack. They've broken that rule, therefore we're talking about a game rule violation. Many of the detain abilities are triggered. I'm not going to discuss that in great depth, not because I don't like triggers, because trust me, I love triggers and I can talk about triggers for a long time, and I'm planning on doing so. Next week's Magic the Judging is going to be all about triggered abilities, what they are, where they're from, how the new policy works, and what it means for you. So just an early plug for you, that's triggers next week. Not talking about it this week. Okay, so that was white-blue. Let's move on to Izzet. Izzet are the blue-red guild, and they have a keyword which appears only on instants and sorceries called overload. Overload is phrased as overload cost, and the overload cost is always higher than the mana cost, and it means you can pay the overload cost instead of the mana cost to upgrade the spell. The upgrade you get is always the same. It changes it from a targeted spell, for example, deal 1 damage to target creature you don't control, into a global spell, deal 1 damage to each creature you don't control. And that's actually exactly what it does. It changes all of the instances of the word target to the word each. The way that overload cards are designed, they all either only affect target permanent you control or target creature you control, or target X you don't control. This means that the overload is only ever an upgrade, i.e. I'm never in a situation where I think, do I want to overload this or not? I always want to overload it. I don't have to worry about the spell splashing onto creatures I don't want to affect. If I can overload it, generally speaking, I'm going to want to do so. That's actually everything I would say about overload. It just changes target to each, makes it from targeted to not targeted. That's all. In terms of talking about competitive overload, there are several overload spells, primarily Museum Mortars, which are likely to see fairly serious constructed play. The issue that we're likely to see in terms of constructive play, and is going to come up more often, particularly with cards like Geist of St. Traft in the format, is targeting. The spells are targeted when cast for their regular mana cost, and are not targeted when overloaded. This means that the interaction with hexproof is not necessarily obvious. A Museum Mortars cannot target a Geist of St. Traft, but an overloaded Museum Mortars will damage a Geist of St. Traft because it doesn't target the Geist. The other interaction that you're more likely to see in competitive potentially is the interaction with protection. Protection, as an ability, does prevent targeting. So much like the hexproof example, you will not be able to target a protected creature with an overload spell, but it may be affected by the overloaded version. I say may because, of course, the effect depends on what the card is doing. The specifics of this are that protection, I'm sure probably you've heard the acronym before, DET, D-E-B-T. Protection stops damage, enchanting, blocking, and targeting, and also equipping and fortifying, but that doesn't happen. So what this means is that depending on what the overload spell does, it may or may not affect a protection creature. Taking the example of a creature, for example, with protection from red, Museum Mortars will not target it, so it will at least be able to affect it, but Museum Mortars deals damage, and therefore the protection from red will stop that. However, a protection from blue creature is not likewise protected from Cyclonic Rift, which returns non-land permanents to their owner's hand. That's not on my list DEBT, therefore that's not going to be stopped. Therefore, what I would expect at competitive tournaments, we're probably going to see occasional discussions or arguments about how that works. I don't think there's probably much else on overload. So that was Izzet. Let's go from there to our red-black guild. That's the Cult of Rakdos. Rakdos is one of the most aggressive guilds. It's a very kind of carnival death party themed. It's quite a fun guild, as I mentioned earlier. It's one of my favourites. Their keyword is Unleash. Now, Unleash is a replacement effect that allows the controller a choice. It only appears on creatures. When an Unleashed creature enters the battlefield, its controller has the option of putting a +1/+1 counter on it. It also acts to stop, for example, anything with Unleash. If it has a +1/+1 counter on it, can't block. An important thing to note is that those two things aren't actually necessarily tied together. What that means is that a creature that has the Unleash keyword, if it has a +1/+1 counter on it for any reason from any source, can't block. This segues quite nicely into Golgari. I'm just going to quickly go over what to talk about at pre-release for Unleash, pretty much just what I told you. The only thing to emphasize is just that fact that the +1/+1 counters could come from anywhere. The second thing that I would like to tell people to think about in terms of competitive Unleash, and there are some of these Unleash creatures are very aggressively costed, is just making sure this is not a triggered ability, as it happens, it's a replacement effect. It doesn't use the stack. Therefore, what it means is, as soon as the creature is resolved, it either has that +1/+1 counter on it or it doesn't. There's no opportunity to respond, for example, whilst the creature is still smaller. You have to use it straight away. For example, I'll take an example, Rakdos Cackler. It's a 1-mana 1/1 with Unleash. There's no point at which it's not a 2/2. If you're going to choose to have that +1/+1 counter, it will be a 2/2 from the moment it is on the battlefield. And that choice is also not made until the creature resolves, so the controller does not have some chance to, for example, think about whether they want to target it or counter it or not based on whether it's going to be unleashed, because they won't know until the spell resolves. So, Golgari, my guild for tonight. So the admirable and wonderful Golgari Swarm mechanic is Scavenge. This is all about not letting your dead creatures go to waste. Scavenge allows you to pay a cost, which is defined by the ability, and exile the creature from your graveyard in order to put +1/+1 counters equal to the creature card's power on a target. Specifically, what this would mean is, for example, you might have a card with Scavenge 3 and a green, which is got 3 power. That means you can pay 3 and a green and exile it to put 3 +1/+1 counters on a target. First things first is I mentioned that this interacts with Unleash. It does. You can target any creature with Scavenge, therefore, theoretically, you might be able to put +1/+1 counters with Scavenge onto your opponent's Unleash creature to stop it blocking. I would mention that in the pre-release because those are both common mechanics. That interaction is very likely to come up, and people will be interested to know that it happened. Otherwise, Scavenge is fairly straightforward. The creature's power is in the graveyard basically impossible to affect, therefore you don't need to worry about that. It's just going to be whatever power is printed on it. The +1/+1 counters are +1/+1 counters, we all know about that. The other thing to note is that Scavenge can only be used at sorcery speed. What it actually says is Scavenge, you can Scavenge only as a sorcery, something similar to this. It's worth mentioning that that is actually a rules-defined piece of terminology which occasionally does cause some confusion. What it does not mean is at a time that you could cast a sorcery card from your hand. It means the usual timing for non-instant cards, i.e. during your main phase, when the stack is empty and you have priority. What it does not mean is time I could cast a sorcery, and very specifically, the Izzet pre-release card lets you cast sorcery cards as though they had flash, which is nice, but it does not let you scavenge as though you had flash as well. Because every single Izzet player in your room is going to have access to a hypersonic dragon, it is definitely worth reminding them that that's how it works. At a more competitive level, some of the scavenge creatures are reasonably aggressively costed. We may well see some of them in constructed. We do also, of course, at the minute have a great deal of graveyard removal available in the format. Because scavenge exiles the creature as part of the cost, it's worth knowing that if you try to respond to a scavenge by exiling the creature from the graveyard in order to prevent it from happening, that won't work. Because you're going to exile that creature as part of paying the cost. The first thing your opponent knows about it, the creature has already been exiled, and exiling the graveyard, whilst legal, if somebody in a competitive tournament wants to do it, let them do it. It's a legal play. It's just not a helpful play, and there's a distinction there. So this brings us to our fifth and final guild, which is Selesnya. Selesnya is a guild that is all about tokens. It loves making tokens, using tokens. Their mechanic is Populate, which is a riff on the just now rotating out of standard Proliferate mechanic. Populate is another keyword action similar to Detain. What Populate means is choose a token you control, make a copy of that token. That's it. Copy effects generally are one of the most complicated things in Magic the Gathering. However, tokens are one of the simplest things in Magic the Gathering in terms of what characteristics they have. Therefore, copies of them are very simple. A Centaur token is a 3/3 green creature token in this set. A clone of one is another one, another 3/3 green Centaur. There is no complication about how Populate interacts, therefore, because it can only copy very simple creatures. A couple of things about Populate. There are several cards in the set which make a token and then populate. Obviously, the intention here, not to talk down too much, but the intention is that you can populate the token you just made. That is, of course, not absolutely what you have to do. There's no reason why you can't, for example, play something like an Eyes in the Skies, which makes a 1/1 bird and populates, make a 1/1 bird and populate something else. Say, for example, the 8/8 token that your pre-release card can make. For example, you could do that. Another little cute thing here, I have to mention this. This is my favorite interaction. Vraska the Unseen, the green-black planeswalker, makes 1/1 assassins, which kill a player if they take damage from the assassin, and you can populate those. And if you do, you're my hero. Please tweet me and tell me about it, because that's awesome. That's everything I've got to say on Populate. I don't think, in terms of competitive events, there's any particular pitfalls that we're likely to run into with Populate. It is actually a fairly straightforward mechanic most of the time. What I want to wrap up this session with is just a little bit of a chat about a couple of specific cards which I feel are likely to come into. Oh, somebody's asking what I'd like me to tweet. Please tweet to me if you manage, or anyone at your pre-release manages, to populate an additional Vraska assassin token. The 1/1 assassins that kill you, if somebody manages to populate a fourth one, please tweet me, because that's hilarious. Speaking of tweeting, by the way, there is now a Twitter account associated with this, which is @MagicTheJudging, which is being run by Gareth Tanner, who I should say is awesome and fantastic for doing all of the background work that makes all this possible. And so you can direct your tweet there. You can also direct your tweet directly to me. I'm at Savia Wanderer, which is SAVIA at Savia Wanderer. If you are following at Magic the Judging, we tend to talk to each other a lot, seeing as they're both sort of me. So do particularly if you've got a picture of that happening, but do let me know if that happens, because that's the thing I most want to hear about this weekend. Anyway, I'm just going to wrap up with a little bit of a chat over a couple of the rules and potential screw-ups that you might see as we start to judge Return to Ravnica, both this weekend at the pre-release and also over the coming weeks in more general places. So I wanted to start with talking about Augur Spree. Augur Spree is one of the best removal spells in the format, so you're likely to see it in limited quite a bit. It's 1 black and a red to give target creature +4, -4. And that's the first thing I wanted to stress, is that that's a +4 on the front. It's easy to just assume that this is, like almost all spells, either both pluses, both minuses. The second is just a little mention of the interaction with indestructibility. As you may well know, if you can get an indestructible creature to 0 toughness or less, then that will kill it, despite the fact it's indestructible. So that is something that we might see come up here and there. I also wanted to stress a couple of other card interactions. Desecration Demon is another one. Desecration Demon has a triggered ability that triggers at the beginning of combat that gives your opponents the option to sacrifice a creature. The trigger is a little unusual. If they sacrifice a creature, you tap the demon and put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's unusual in that if they choose to pay the sacrifice cost, you get one good thing and one bad thing. A lot of people, and I do mean a lot of people, misread this card thinking that the good thing and the bad thing are separate, and that, for example, sacrificing taps it, not sacrificing gives it a +1/+1, or vice versa. So it's an easy card to misread. It's very, very playable because it's a 4-mana 6/6, and it is something that I would definitely recommend that you look at and that you make sure that people play correctly. The other thing about that guy is that he triggers at the beginning of every combat step, including the one on your turn as well as the one on their turn. So if they, for example, you play it post-combat, they can then tap it by sacrificing a creature in their combat step to take it away as a blocker. Another card I wanted to discuss briefly was Essence Backlash. Essence Backlash is an Izet-coloured blue and red counterspell with counter target creature spell, and then it deals damage to the controller equal to that spell's power. That is a phrase which has always had a rules meaning for many years, but has never been used before. What it means is the power of the creature that you just countered, which is a statistic, a characteristic that exists on the stack. It's just incredibly weird for a spell to actually directly reference it in this fashion. So the rules things to think about here is, firstly, because the creature spell is still on the stack, it will not have the benefit of any effects that are in play. So, for example, Collective Blessing is an enchantment that gives all your creatures +3/+3. If you have that and your spell gets countered by an Essence Backlash, luckily for you, it doesn't have +3/+3 yet, and you won't take additional damage. The other thing about Essence Backlash is just a note on creatures with variable power and toughness. There is actually an example in this set, which is the Selesnya rare Wayfaring Temple, which has power and toughness equal to the number of creatures you control. Again, the card is not in play yet, so Wayfaring Temple would not count itself because as part of determining its power and toughness. But much like anything else, these cards do update their power and toughness in real time. What this means is that a Wayfaring Temple on the stack has power and toughness equal to the number of creatures you have on the battlefield right now. This means that a Essence Backlash will deal damage to you equal to the number of creatures you control. So it's something, I'm mentioning this specifically because under the old rules, then variables like that weren't on cards in play defaulted to being worth 0, and that is not the case anymore. It is updating, it is up to date. Essence Backlash will deal you damage based on its actual power. If, for example, you were lucky enough to be able to counter a Tarmogoyf with it, you are going to take damage equal to the equal to the number of card types in all graveyards. And actually, an extra wrinkle for you, you guys like me that really enjoy your corner case rules. If for some reason you're in a format where Essence Backlash and Tarmogoyf are both available, and for some reason you're playing those two cards are in the same match, an Essence Backlash that counters a Tarmogoyf, the Essence Backlash itself is still on the stack, still in the middle of resolving when it deals that damage. What that means is that it will do the effects in order. It will put the Tarmogoyf in the graveyard and then deal damage. So the Essence Backlash is not, therefore, in a position to be counted if, for example, there isn't an instant in the graveyard yet. Right, let's move on from obscure counterspells and just round out with a couple other things. Pack Rat, I really want to quickly talk about Pack Rat. Pack Rat is a cool little rat. He has power and toughness equal to the number of rat control, which also makes him interesting with his Essence Backlash, incidentally. And it has an ability that lets you discard a card and pay 3 mana to make a token that is a copy of Pack Rat. The simple thing in here is that it's making a token copy of him. That means the token has the ability to make more Pack Rats. It also means that you can populate that token to get more token Pack Rats. Also cool. Not as cool as Ravnica, but also pretty cool. A final specific card issue before we wrap up. Rakdos Charm. I really want to emphasize this one because the official FAQ actually contained an error on Rakdos Charm. Specifically, the interaction of one of the modes of Rakdos Charm with Planeswalkers. One of the modes of Rakdos Charm is each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. It is a very unusually worded thing, and specifically whether or not this is eligible for the damage jump to the Planeswalker. If your opponent controls a Planeswalker and you play a Rakdos Charm, you're making your opponent's creatures deal damage to your opponent. This is non-combat damage, but even though it's your Rakdos Charm that's doing it, or at least is making it happen, it's still not a damage